Welcome to Collider Dailies, the last Collider Dailies of the year. And boy, what a show do we have for you. I'm John Algetz, and I'm joined, as always, by
Maggie Lovitz.
Maggie. How are you doing today?
I am doing good. I am looking forward to 2024. Wild that it's like days away.
Right? How was if you were to give a letter grade to 2023, just as a year in general for you, what do you think you would give it?
I think it was an A+ year, man. There's so much happened this year that I just cannot believe happened. So no, this was a good year. I am very excited for 2024 though, because I think there's even more potential for it to be even better. Maybe it'll be an A++ year.
I will say that 2023 was I won't go so high as an A+, but it was probably in the B range for me. There
That's
was,
good.
there were some highs, there were some lows. I feel like the last 6 months of the year are definitely in the A range. The first 6 months of the year for me
Because of
were not
dailies,
as great.
right?
Dailies is a major factor for it, but
Not bad.
it just is what it is. But as far as movies this year, there's been some great ones that I would definitely say put it into the A range. And that is what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about our top three films. Yesterday, Stephen Perry regaled you with theirs. So now it is our turn to hit you with our lists. And boy, do we have some lists. But
We
before we
do.
get into that, let's just say happy Friday to Mike, and Stravula, Stra, Stev. I'm trying. Uh,
Stavrula.
Happy Friday, happy holidays, all that stuff to you guys. Thank you for joining the show. Let's go ahead and get into it right now, right out the gate. Maggie, I know that you have more than three.
I do
You
have
have
more
quite
than
the
three.
list.
So I filled out my letterbox top 15. Last year was a top 10. This year there was just so many movies that like struck a chord with me that I was like, I'm gonna do a bonus five, so it's 15 this year. But something I thought about when trying to come up with my top three for today's episode is, watching dailies yesterday. Steve's number one is also my number one, so I feel like we've already tread that territory already. So I'm going to do my top two and then one from my top five that I think people need to watch. So I will actually start with that one if that is okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I think that everyone needs to watch Suzume if they haven't watched it yet. It came out in festivals earlier in the year and then released a few months ago. I believe it is available on streaming now, but it may still be on VOD. But it is just a beautiful film that it's an animated film and it is really fantastical in its execution. There's like demons and portals and doors and like all of this stuff. But at its heart, it is a film about the 2011 earthquake that caused the nuclear reactor to go off in Japan. And it is about like the how do I explain it? It is about like the trauma that entire generation of people dealt with and the long lasting effects of that are still felt today. And it is a really interesting like introspective look at like processing trauma and growing from it and dealing with grief. And I think at least from looking at a lot of like the letterbox reviews of it, it seems like American audiences aren't necessarily getting that. Like they're focused on the fact that like the hot guy gets turned into a chair in it, but they're not really processing like what it is about. And so I hope that as more people, watch it and they see some of the top rated reviews on Letterboxd, they're like, oh, let me go look at this because it is recent history. It happened in 2011, and it's really fascinating to see the way that they are processing it through art. And it made me cry. It was a beautifully animated film, and it is so rich with emotions. And it's just, I highly recommend it, and it is definitely up there in like my top five for 2023. But I just wanted to bring that, to awareness.
We were talking a little bit before the show about what were on our top lists, and we were talking about this plan for you to like bring in another film because your number one was already talked about. Uh, and I mentioned that Suzume is on my list.
Mm-hmm.
It's a ways down the list, but it is one that I definitely want to watch here soon. I think after hearing you talk about it and after hearing a little bit more about it, I might bump it up the list a little bit because it does definitely sound like something that I feel like more people need to watch. Uh, I will say though, going from crying tears over something super tragic to crying tears over something absolutely terrifying, because my number three is Evil Dead Rise. I I adore this movie. Here's the thing. I've been having some trouble over the last couple of years getting really excited about movies. I don't find myself getting as hyped as I used to. I'm not like sitting there counting down the days waiting for the movie to come out like I used to. Maybe it's old age, maybe it's the job. I don't know what's causing it, but the one movie that has got me super excited and super pumped was Evil Dead Rise. Huge Evil Dead fan. So going into this movie, I my expectations were through the roof, and I gotta say, they met them. This might honestly be one of the scariest movies I have ever seen. It is possession films done right, which is what I said about Evil Dead 2013, and it still stands with this movie, I feel. The cast does a stellar job, the special effects are brilliant. Everything about it is just amazing from beginning to end. It is one of those films that you sit down and it gets your blood pumping, it gets all of your nerves on end, and it just does not let go from beginning to end. And it was one of those things that I was sitting there in the theater by myself, and I honestly could not think of a worse situation to be in a movie theater by yourself watching this movie. Worst or best, depending on your viewpoint on it, because I was just so horrifically terrified, which is something that doesn't happen very often anymore. Like movies don't hit me like that anymore, but this film managed to, and it is one that I I will say, because of this movie, I am incredibly excited to see more Evil Dead. According to Bruce Campbell, we're going to be getting more of them at a more regular rate, which I'm super stoked for. I mean, I would have been excited as a fan, but now I'm like not nervous about them being bad because I trust this creative team. And I think that they are going to continue to do great stuff. And I hope that they continue to do great stuff. And I hope that they build upon the awesomeness that is this film.
I love that. Very nice. Not one that I have seen this year, unfortunately. Not
Not
as
a
big into horror as you and Perry are, unfortunately. Um,
Yeah, I actually had to struggle to not put more horror films on my top list. Like there was I will say that because we're about to jump into our second films. For me, the second film, there was a battle for that spot. But before we get to mine, what is the second film that you want to talk about?
so my second film is technically my number three for my real list, and that
Oh,
is Saltburn. I loved it so much, and it kills me that the discourse on social media lately has been like, hey, let's make fun of Saltburn, because I'm like, I love that movie so much. I love Emerald Fennell, and I think it did really make it even more impactful to have like listened to her talk about it before we saw it, because listening to her conversation at the festival made me realize like how similar our minds work. I had already liked Promising Young Woman, and I have liked her in some of her previous stuff that she's acted in. But hearing her kind of love for like the weird, macabre, creepy, icky kinds of horror, but also like the mystery and like the gothic novel of it all, just was like, oh, I'm gonna love this movie. And then I did. And even like all of the weird stuff, like the bathtub, the grave, the vampire thing, like there's so much stuff in this movie that people are like, that's not shocking, that's pedestrian. But they did not get to see this movie sitting in a room full of old rich biddies. Like seeing those reactions is like the best part of the movie. But I think that it captured a style of storytelling that I'm really partial to, which is like the British estate mystery kind of stuff, like Midsummer Murders and those TV series that are a staple of like British television. And that is how Saltburn is laid out, from the kind of slow beginnings at Oxford and kind of like laying out like the interpersonal relationships, to then the second act, which is where the weird stuff starts happening. You start to see things connecting and realizing where things are going, to the third act, which can sometimes feel anticlimactic. Like I understand where a lot of like the complaints have been, where they say that act three feels like anticlimactic, but it's that style of storytelling. Like by that point, you figured it out because it's sort of a mystery and you are supposed to be working it out as an audience. And then you get to it and you're like, oh. and that's where it was for me. And I just thought Barry Keoghan's performance was phenomenal. That character Oliver is so odd. Like he's so tightly repressed feeling, but there's like so many like bursts of like the crazy, and it just is such a transfixing like movie to watch and like see things unravel. And the entire cast is so phenomenal. I just loved it. I thought Emerald did a really like great job with it, and it was exactly what I expected. So I loved it, and I would like undoubtedly watch it many more times if I wasn't trying to like rush to get a lot of other movies in before the year ends, which I think we can both kind of
Yeah.
understand. It's that rush, but I loved it, and it is great to have seen a few people who also loved it in the same way I did. And I'm also living for the TikTok trend this holiday season, which is people watching it with their families without knowing what's going to happen in it. Chef's Kiss, The Looks of Horror. It is fantastic.
So I will say we've talked about Saltburn, I think,
Yeah,
on dailies before. So my opinion on it is known. I'm not as big of a fan of it as you are. That
yeah,
being said, it is very beautifully shot, beautifully acted.
gorgeous.
I think that it is an exceptionally well crafted film.
It kills
Oh,
me though to see it described as a period piece, a historical piece. There's a double entendre there. But because it's like 2006, it like it just I'm like I remember those fashions, and the fashion is so on brand. Like the tiny things down to like the Live Strong bracelets. Like it's so well done. It feels like 2006 in England at Oxford. It's like so nail on the head. It's insane.
I actually didn't catch that it takes place in 2006, and I just thought it was normal.
Yeah, I mean, they have like the chunky belts and the ballet flats and like
Yeah, now that I'm looking back
the
at some of the
polos
costume
and top.
designing, I'm like, yeah, that 100% was early 2000s. But my brain just registered that as like normal
And
everyday
it
clothing.
makes
That
even
like,
more sense with some of the aspects of it, and it's just it's so smart. It like the way that that was constructed with it being a technically like a historical piece, but still being the recent, and her description of why she chose it. One, because she went to Oxford then, she knows that time period very well, but also because it's not like 20 years ago. Well, it's almost 20 years ago, but it's not quite 20 years ago or 30 years ago where there's a hint of nostalgia to it. It's just recent enough that we get the ick from it because we were very much aware of how we were dressing, and now we look back at that time period kind of being like, oh, that was a whole weird time period. And it's meant to give you a sort of like unsettled ick, which I think helps further the ick of the entire thing. It's just it was very smartly like the concept was just very smart.
maybe it's because I'm a dude and I have like different viewpoints on like fashion and stuff around that
Well,
time.
yeah.
But I do not get the ick looking at like how I dressed back then. Like again, maybe it's also a personal problem. Maybe my style just hasn't changed since 2006.
Oh my gosh, maybe. But I mean,
My
it
jeans are
sounds like
slightly like less baggy.
it's
That
just
is
even down to the bracelet stuff. I don't know if you were ever like around the Live Strong bracelets and like the
I
getting
mean, I
them
was
from the
around it,
vending
but I never wore
machines,
them.
and it was a whole vibe then, not now.
I also have 2006 for me. I have like a much different viewpoint on the early 2000s than most people because I grew up in tiny little podunk rural Oregon. So like all of our fashion trends were like a little bit behind
Yeah.
or like not as extreme as people who grew up in larger population centers. So I don't know. Again, I didn't even think that it was a period piece, but
That's
that's
too
fine
funny.
because that happens sometimes.
The more you know.
But yeah, no, that is a solid second choice, and I feel like there's going to be a lot of people who are going to definitely be placing
Hmm.
Saltburn pretty high up on their list. For me though, my second film is also one that I'm seeing a lot of people placing high. I'm even seeing people placing in the top spot some of the time. I don't know if it necessarily should go that high, but the fact that I'm putting it at number two tells you a lot, and that is Past Lives. I actually just watched this movie last night. It was part of my like scramble to try to get in every film that I felt necessary for me to watch before the end of the year. And if if I hadn't watched this film last night, this spot would have gone to Talk to Me. Uh, So again, there's the whole like horror element
Which was
which
one
would
of
definitely
Perry's
do it.
top three.
Yeah, we can both agree on how great that film is. But I will say that Past Lives, I am a sucker for two different types of films. I'm a sucker for horror films and I am a sucker for romance films. I realize that these things are diametrically opposed to each other,
No, they go hand in hand. Hand in
somewhat.
unlovable hand. Yep.
They can, I guess. But this movie hit me in the feels so hard. It is so wonderfully written, so wonderfully directed. The actors do a brilliant job of embodying these very emotional roles, and it managed to make me feel nostalgic for events that I didn't experience. Because throughout this film you're exploring these two people's lives and exploring what could have been had things gone slightly different for them at a different point in their life. And it just was so heartfelt, so emotionally driven, and so I don't know, it just like it made me feel feelings that I'm still like trying to parse out because again, just watched it last night. But it was so beautiful and so brilliant that I felt it had to be on here somewhere. And so that's why I threw Past Lives on there. I don't have a lot to say, sadly. I don't have a lot of my thoughts formulated. It being here is much more of a gut feeling, but I just felt like I had to put it there. I loved Past Lives. I'm probably going to rewatch it, not until I finish all of the other films, but I will rewatch it here as soon as I possibly can because it was just so much fun.
I love when a movie hits you so hard that it instantly goes onto your like best of the year list. I love when that happens. Which actually very much happened when I saw this film at the same film festival that I saw Saltburn, and it was very funny too because I saw it in a old school theater, so it was like a perfect setting for it. And that is The Holdovers, which is technically my number two, but in this case, it is my number one. I loved this film so much. Talking about like the feeling of nostalgia for something that you haven't experienced yourself like resonates with me with this film the way you were talking about Past Lives, because it felt like a film I had already seen, a film that I had grown up loving, a film that had like just been a staple. And I still just can't get over how well Alexander Payne did with constructing a film that had like this inherent nostalgia to it and like this instant classic vibe, because it felt like a film that hasn't been made in decades. It's a film that just like kind of hits on all of the right emotional points without it feeling truly forced. Like it doesn't feel like a film that is trying to make you feel something. It's there to like be received, if that makes sense. The whole cast is phenomenal. It's such a small cast. You know, Paul Giamatti is always a phenomenal actor, but this performance is just somehow even better than anything else I've ever seen him in. And then to have an actor who this is his very first on-screen role ever, and Dominic Sessa, like, and he's so good as, you know, this kind of like young lead that, you know, is still kind of coming into his own, and he does it so well. I just love this film so much. Um, it's the perfect holiday film, and I love holiday films. Like the films that take place around Christmas and New Year's just have like a certain warmth to them naturally that I tend to like gravitate towards those. I am a Hallmark girly, but I just love The Holdovers. And I think part of it was the fact that I came into it not knowing or expecting anything. This was a film my mom had seen the trailer for and was like, oh, that looks interesting. And then when I saw it was at the film festival, I was like, oh, let's go. And I was like reduced to tears. I was like absolutely hooked from the first moment. It was just so good. And it makes me so happy to see a lot of other people feeling the same way. Like, I obviously don't need my feelings to be like reinforced by other people, but it is nice to have like a shared experience and like see other people also feeling like this film evokes sort of nostalgia for films that we don't really see as much anymore. So this was really like a film that was back and forth on my list. Like, is this going to be my actual number one or is this going to be my number two? Back and forth. So it's quite fitting that in the end, because I decided to omit Oppenheimer, it ended up being my number one for this situation.
This is a movie that you've been kind of ranting and raving about this movie
Yeah,
for a little bit here. Like you bring it up quite often,
it's so
and
good.
it is one that I have not gotten the chance to see, but it is definitely super high on my list of ones that I do need to go see.
Watch it. You will love it.
Just simply because any movie that can make my favorite co-host
Oh,
it's just melt is gonna make me want to jump in
it's so
and
good.
check it out myself. So no offense to Perry and Steve, you guys are also
Hey,
pretty
Perry
good.
also loves
They're
this.
not here right now.
This is true. Oh, and obviously, Divine Joy Randolph is amazing. Like, I feel bad that I didn't mention her there. She's like the anchor of like the emotional anchor for the film. She is so good, and she's also so good in like just anything you watch her in. Uh, that core three is just so good in that film. It's so good. She makes me cry the most in the movie, though.
According to Mike Joyce, it just got added to Peacock today.
Oh,
So
well, there you go.
I will
Perfect
I will
timing.
have to definitely that'll make checking it out a lot easier. Maybe that's something that I'll watch this afternoon.
There you go.
Although I've got a lot to do, and I feel like that's maybe a movie that I should pay
Yeah,
attention
you need to
to
be
instead of
focused.
like be working while I watch, which is what I've been doing with a lot of films. And maybe I
And it would
should.
be a good movie to watch with your family since you're home still. It is a
I
family
am
movie.
until I am home until Monday, and then I will be at my proper home. Uh, Speaking of like films that hit you emotionally, my number one is one that I didn't expect to hit me emotionally, just based off of the fact that it comes from a franchise that's never really been super hard hitting, like weighty. I mean, it's always had a message, but it's never been super like emotionally driven. Because my number one is Godzilla Minus One. I
More like plus
adore
one,
this
right?
film. I adore this film absolutely. It is when I say that it was a Godzilla film that caused me to walk away in tears, it very much did. This film is what Godzilla should always be. It perfectly balanced the monster stuff, Godzilla going around rampaging, doing what Godzilla do, with the human stuff, which is a very hard balance to try to strike. Very few films in this series have ever been able to get that balance quite right. Oftentimes you find yourself not caring about the human element or sitting there complaining that there's not enough Godzilla. This one hit a happy balance, and the human elements to this film are so powerful and so almost draining that it just hits you so hard because you've got people who are dealing with PTSD from the events of World War II. You have an entire nation that is reeling from the end of that war and trying to figure out how they're going to deal with everything. And now all of a sudden there's a giant nuclear lizard. It's like just kicking them while they're down. And it's just Godzilla here also is probably at his most terrifying. You haven't seen a Godzilla that is this scary very often. It like maybe Shin Godzilla back in 2016, he was a scary monster again. And then, the original one from the 50s was the last time that he was actually like scary to this degree. It is it's one of those films that the VFX isn't amazing, but it is just good enough that it doesn't break your, suspension of disbelief. It doesn't take you out of the movie. And it's just one of those films that I could see myself watching over and over and over again, and I've been recommending it to every person with ears who is anywhere near me. Last night I went out to dinner with my best friend and his family, got a chance to catch up with them. Haven't seen them since last year, and one of the first things I did immediately was recommending Godzilla Minus One to every single person at that table, and it was great because my best friend was right there with me, being like, "Oh yeah, no, watch Godzilla Minus One; it's the best." Uh, and it very much is. It is a film that left me contemplating a lot of things about history, about just life in general, which I was not expecting from a giant monster movie. I think that right there is what this film is. It is a film that hits you with something unexpected in the best way possible. Um, yeah, it's just a great film. Go see
I
it.
have not seen it yet, but based off everything that everybody has said about it and how it explores trauma and PTSD and all of this, I would say that I think watching that and Suzume in the same day would be a really good double feature.
There's
Because
a
I
lot. I feel like there's a lot that would probably line up.
Yeah, because the processing of trauma while like this big fantastical wild thing is also happening is such a fascinating way to like compare two kind of conflicting emotions, which also kind of weirdly goes hand in hand with like your love for horror and romance, like things that don't technically go hand in hand working so well with processing these like heightened human emotions, which is like the beauty of film, being able to process things on screen and then making people feel is just why we love
I think
movies, right?
really when you break it down and you look at like my top films period, the things that I enjoy the most, like I want to feel things, I want to feel deep emotions, whether that emotion is a deep sense of dread and fear, whether it's like this warm cozy loving feeling, or
Mhm.
if it's deeply traumatic, horrifically like broken sort of just
Yeah.
sadness. I love feeling the strongest of feels, and that is what makes movies so great. Heartbreak feels good in a
Do it in
place
a
like
place like
this.
this. Exactly.
I guess is what I am ultimately
Oh,
ultimately saying.
mm.
Before we go, let's take a moment to jump into the chat because a few of you guys have left your top three films of the year, and I want to take some time to highlight this. Mike Joyce's top three is The Holdovers at number three, When Evil Lurks at number two, and Across the Spider Verse at number one. I
Oh, yeah.
actually struggled. I actually struggled with Across the Spider Verse because I felt the I felt the pull to put it in my top three, but I couldn't justify unseating any of the three that were there to put it in. Maybe Beyond the Spider Verse will make its way in. Mike K says Godzilla minus one, Oppenheimer, and The Boy and the Heron. I still need to see The Boy and the Heron.
Born
Have
the
you seen
Heron
The
is
Boy and
really
the Heron?
good. I've seen it. It probably wasn't one of my it didn't make it on my top 15, but it is excellent. I will say in all of those films, like Howl's Moving Castle is my all-time favorite, so I think I judge everything off of that, which is a problem.
I hate myself, so my favorite is Grave of the Fireflies.
Oh, that
Uh,
makes sense.
yeah, I'm trying to see if there were anybody who also dropped threes. Those are the ones.
Those are
I
the
will
ones.
say that T&J Omaha is saying, I feel Infinity Pool is getting lost in the shuffle. Most of Brandon Cronenberg's work. Definitely a better horror movie than Evil Dead Rise and Scream 6. I don't disagree with you. I do think that Brandon Cronenberg is definitely underrated. Possessor was one of my favorite films of 2020, even though it is a bit of a it is a bit screwy with your
Yeah.
like in your mind. I can't swear, so I can't say what it is that I want to say about that film. And Infinity Pool is very much upon that same sort of thing.
Yeah.
Jisty 13 points out Poor Things. I didn't get a chance to see Poor Things, so I can't speak to Poor Things at all.
I have nothing good to say about Poor Things, so pass.
Oh, okay.
But I will
uh,
say, like, I'm gonna post my letterbox link onto my Twitter when I'm done here, so y'all can go see all the movies that I ranked on my top 15. And hey, don't judge me because yeah, I have Dungeons and Dragons on there. I also have Rebel Moon on there because let's talk about films that ended up making me feel something that I wanted to feel. I enjoyed them. So ultimately, our top threes, tens,
can
15s are
I
all subjective.
can I just say so? Like I've been, on Twitter, I saw you talking about Rebel Moon.
Yeah,
I
I've
will
seen
I
it
will
three
throw this
times
out
this
there.
week.
I was surprised that you liked Rebel Moon as much as you seem to.
Yeah, it surprised me too. But I will say, like, I have a long history with liking Zack Snyder's movies. And I think that if you've already kind of been primed to enjoy his work, like one of my comfort films when I was like 11 or 12 was Dawn of the Dead. I loved his Dawn of the Dead so much, which is coming to Netflix next week, in fact. And I'm very excited to rewatch that. But like, I have a soft spot for Snyder's work. I like some of the themes. Is he a perfect filmmaker? No. He has his gimmicks no more than, Christopher Nolan has or any of the people who make lots of films. He has his gimmicks and they work for me. Rebel
Yeah.
Moon, I feel like I am in an MLM of some sort. I've been trying to get multiple people to watch it. I've convinced like six people to read the novelization, which I read this week as well. I've rewatched it like three times this week. I've got other people to watch it. Like I think once it finds the audience that like resonates with like the weird stuff that's in it, it'll find an audience. And part two is out in April.
But getting back to you mentioned that D&D is in your top 10 as if
It
that's
is.
some weird thing. Both me and Mike Joyce would put D&D in our top 10.
Excellent.
So
I think it was my
I
number
will
8. Yeah.
I will say I feel bad. I feel like I'm a terrible professional movie talker because I don't have a letterbox account.
Okay, well, you need one.
Maybe I should start one, make my top list,
Yeah.
and then I'll post mine in the comments too, and you can
There
post
you
yours
go.
down there
Yeah.
so that people can check those out. But that's actually something that I've been thinking about for a while. I'm like, man, why do I not have a letterboxd?
Everyone needs it.
Yeah, yeah, I guess so. But anyways, guys and gals and non-binary pals, this is the end of our episode today, and the end of Collider Dailies in 2023.
I know.
We're going to be starting off next week, right, with Stephen Perry hitting you with their most anticipated films of the year. And then the next day will be Maggie and I talking about our most anticipated films of next year. Or I guess it'll be the current year when we do it. So, be sure to check that out. So, but until then, I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your weekend. I hope that you make some good choices and are safe on New Year's Eve. I will be celebrating with my brother and his like group of friends down at their place. I'll be hanging out with my nieces a little bit, and then probably with playing board games. Maggie, do you have any plans for New Year's?
No.
No, you're just
Nope.
gonna like be hanging out,
Yep.
being Maggie,
Yep.
probably jumping on Twitter talking about some
Always.
ship that nobody's ever heard of.
Probably.
Probably. That's on brand. Anyways, hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your weekend, and we will catch you next week or next year.